All right. Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome us all to today's class, environmental science. And last week we looked at climate. Okay, looked at the overview and description of the climate as a way of introducing this particular course. And today we'll be looking at greenhouse effect. Like I told us last week, we'll be looking at climate, then greenhouse effect, global warming, ozone depletion. All these things are the things that lead to the climate change. And then we'll look at pollution and of course spillage. Those are the things that make up this particular class. Okay, so but for today, our attention will be focused on greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect. So if you're ready, because I'm ready, let's set the ball rolling. I hope you have your pen and your paper to be able to grasp what we have for you today. All right, so in the course of today's class, we'll be looking at this if time permits, but if time doesn't permit, we'll continue from where we'll stop by next week. So we'll be looking at the history of greenhouse gases. Okay, we'll look at the effect, the causes of greenhouse gases, the importance of greenhouse effect. Okay, so there's a positive effect and there's also a negative effect. They'll look at the disadvantages that this greenhouse effect has in the environment, the future, and the rest of them. And then what are the solutions? What can we do to curtail this greenhouse effect on the environment? And of course, as a student of JPTS, what can we also do to contribute, okay, in a greenhouse effect, the research or the talk about greenhouse effect. So those are the things I'm going to be looking at today, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to do justice to all of that today. All right, so quickly let's look at the history of greenhouse effect. I would have loved us to define greenhouse effect first before we look at the history. Let me make my screen bolder so that you can see. All right, so let's define greenhouse effect so that we understand what greenhouse effect is before we now go back to the history of greenhouse effect. Now we simply define the greenhouse effect to be the process by which radiation from a planet's atmosphere warms the planet's surface to a temperature above what it would be without this atmosphere. Okay, let me say it again. I said the greenhouse effect is the process by which radiation from a planet's atmosphere warms the planet's surface to a temperature above what it would be without this atmosphere. Now, what it means is this. Let me explain it briefly so that we understand what I just said. What it means is this. Basically, there are two phenomena that I want us to understand here. Number one, radiation from the sun. Okay, and okay, three things I want us to take note of: the radiation from the sun, the greenhouse gases present in the atmosphere, and of course, the Earth atmosphere or the Earth surface. Now, these are the three things I want us to understand to get if we're to understand the meaning of greenhouse effect. Okay, now we know very well that the sun emits sunlight, heat in form of radiation, which falls towards the Earth crust. Now, the atmosphere, like we discussed last week, is made up of gases. We talked about the nitrogen, the oxygen, the methane, and the rest of them are what makes up the atmosphere. Now, the function of these gases, these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, is to help radiate, okay, to help send this heat from the sun down to the earth crust. Okay, that's one of them. And now they don't just send the direct heat from the sun, because the temperature or the heat intensity from the sun is usually very, very high. Partly what the greenhouse gases also do is to trap some of them and then help, this heat to be radiated towards the earth crust. Now, before now, without this radiated heat from the sun, the earth crust would have been so cold to the extent that it would become very dangerous for life existence on the earth. Okay, because naturally the earth is usually colder than the atmosphere. So how the earth receives warmth or heat is through the radiated heat from the sun. So the greenhouse helps to do this, to send it down to the atmosphere. So that makes up that definition, so that when I define it, to be able to understand it, that it's a process by which radiation from the planet's atmosphere warms the planet's surface to a temperature above what would have been without the atmosphere. Now, these radioactive gases, which is the greenhouse gases that we talked about, they help to radiate this energy in all directions, in all the planets, not just the Earth. We also have other planets. So they radiate this heat in all directions. Now, part of this radiation, okay, that the greenhouse gases helps is being directed towards the surface. That's where we are living now, thereby warming up this place for life to be able to exist. Okay, otherwise, it would have been so cold. I think research showed that the Earth's surface is about 33 degrees centigrade colder than what we have in the atmosphere, as you can see from the slide. Okay, so this greenhouse gases helps to radiate part of this heat, okay, towards the Earth's surface, thereby warming it. Now, I want us to understand so that the intensity of this radiation that gets to to the Earth's surface depends on the strength of this greenhouse effect. Okay, so the temperature, the atmospheric temperature that gets to the earth crust depends on the amount of greenhouse gases that we have in the atmosphere. So basically, that's what greenhouse effect is. It helps to bring down the heat, okay, the radiated heat from the sun to the earth crust, thereby warming it up to a certain temperature that is above what it would have been initially. Okay, so that is what the greenhouse effect is. So let's go back to the history of greenhouse effect. Okay, how was it identified, or who identified it? Okay, sorry. So basically, we have that the existence of the greenhouse effect was first named by Joseph Fourier. Joseph Fourier was the first person that actually um, brought about or proposed, okay, this greenhouse effect, okay, but it was further strengthened by Claude Pouillet in 1827. I'm trying to look for the slide so that it will be easier for us to follow with it. Okay, so let me continue while I search for what I'm talking about. Okay, yeah, that's it, the history of the greenhouse effect. So Joseph Fourier was actually the person, okay, who first named it, or who proposed the greenhouse effect. But it was further strengthened, like I told you, by Claude Pouillet in 1827 and 1838. Okay, but the first measurement of infrared absorption and emission, okay, of this radiated heat was actually done by John Tyndall, okay, in between 1859, and over time, later, the effect of these greenhouses was then quantified by Vante Arrhenius in 1896. So he was the first person that made a quantitative prediction of global warming due to a hypothetical doubling of atmospheric carbon dioxide. So what I'm saying in effect is this. Joseph Fourier was the first person that discovered the greenhouse effect back in 1824. So he looked at some experimental data available at the time and worked out that the Earth gets most of its energy from the solar radiation, just as we've explained. The Earth gets energy, that's heat, from the solar radiation. So he thought that gases were responsible for absorbing the radiation and warming the Earth. So he was one of the first scientists who stated that the energy on the Earth came from numerous sources. But that was where his research actually ended. Okay, but like I told you, John Tyndall now picked it up in around 1859. Okay, and he was the first person that actually carried out an analysis to find out how much of these greenhouse gases we have in the atmosphere and how much can they radiate, heat to the earth crust. And then from there, in 1896, Arrhenius continued, the study by quantifying the amount of hydrocarbons and the carbon dioxide, which are known as the ozone layer the ozone depleting substances that we have in the atmosphere now. So he was the one that actually quantified, the amount of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which led to the negative effect, or which helped us identify the negative effect of this greenhouse effect. Okay, so that's a little history about the greenhouse effect and how it came about and the rest of them. All right, so let's proceed. Yeah, I've just explained this. So radiated heat from the sun, okay, is being circulated by the greenhouse gases you have in the atmosphere all over the planet, and part of this radiated heat gets to the earth crust, thereby warming up the earth crust, just as I've explained. All right. Okay, now the atmosphere contains some of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that helps to radiate this heat from the sun, include the water vapor, the carbon dioxide, the methane, the nitrous oxide, and the ozone. These are the natural greenhouse gases that we have in the earth crust. Now we're going to discuss the anthropogenic greenhouse gases. That is the ones that have been sent to the atmosphere by the activities of man. They were naturally not there. Those gases that started causing problem in the earth crust were naturally not there. These are also greenhouse gases that were sent to the atmosphere by man's activity. So refer to those ones as the anthropogenic greenhouse gases. But the natural greenhouse gases as we have are the water vapor, the carbon dioxide, the methane, the nitrous oxide, and ozone. Remember, like I told you, the function of these greenhouse gases, is to help radiate the heat from the sun in order to make the earth crust to be a bit warmer than it was originally. Okay, so let's proceed now. So the earth is much colder than the sun, just like I think I've explained this. Okay, so the greenhouse gases helps to warm up the earth. Okay, now let me explain it for you to understand greenhouse gas. This is an artificial greenhouse, basically for those who grow leguminous plants like the tomatoes, pepper, vegetables, and the rest of them. Now, it is possible to grow these plants when these plants are out of season. There's a particular season where you're supposed to grow some plants, or some plants actually thrive in a particular season. There are some plants that thrive when during the rainy season. There are some that thrive during the dry season. There are some that thrives when the heat is available for photosynthesis, while some plants don't thrive when there's no heat. So depending on the kind of plant you want to do. Now, but greenhouse gas has made it possible to actually grow these plants all round, all through the year, whether the condition is favorable for that plant to grow or not. Artificial greenhouse has made it possible. So all you need to do is to construct a house, okay, with glass. It will have glass walls and it will have glass roofs, just as you have there Now you plant, these crops, okay, inside the glass house, just as you have. Now, once the heat, okay, from the sun is being radiated towards the earth crust, it is being absorbed through the glass into the glass house, thereby supplying heat, okay, sunlight for photosynthesis, for these plants to be able to carry out photosynthesis. Now, one thing about, so during the day, when the weather is warm, the glass absorbs this radiated heat from the atmosphere into the glass house for the plants. Then in the evening, when the weather is much more colder, the inside the glass will remain warm, because one thing about the glass, that the glass would prevent the escape of this heat that it absorbed. Okay, it will prevent the escape of this heat back to the atmosphere. So it preserves that heat that has been trapped from the radiated heat from the sun, thereby keeping the plant, warmed and constantly providing heat, sunlight, that's heat, for photosynthesis to take place. So that's artificial greenhouse. Now, if you understand what I just explained now, that is exactly the concept of greenhouse gases as far as the planet, the Earth, is concerned. The same thing is done. So these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere helps, to send out this radiated heat to the sun, to the earth crust, and the earth crust absorbs it. It reflects back. Okay, it's being distributed around the, the environment, thereby keeping it warm. Even sometimes during the night, you still feel a lot of heat. Why? Because they've been able to hold back this radiated heat from the sun. Okay, so that it keeps the earth warm and warm like that. So that's a simple explanation. If you understand the artificial greenhouse, you'll be able to understand how this greenhouse actually works. All right. So let's proceed to the next slide. Yes, I think I've explained this. So what are the greenhouse effects now? Greenhouse effect. Let's look at the greenhouse effect, or before we get there, let's look at the causes of greenhouse effect for us to be able to understand it very well. The causes of greenhouse effect. Cause of greenhouse effect, they include: one, greenhouse gases; number two, the ozone layer depletion; and of course, number three, formation of clouds. These are the causes of greenhouse effect. Okay, and we're going to be looking at them one after the other. So let's pick the first one, the greenhouse gases. Just like I've told you, there's the natural greenhouse gases and we have the anthropogenic greenhouse gases. Now, what happens is that during man's activity, especially from the petrochemical industries, from agricultural practices, and other industrial activities, certain greenhouse gases are being emitted from their plants, from the equipment, from their engines, and the rest of them. Now, these emitted gases are being fled into the atmosphere. That is the anthropogenic greenhouse. Naturally, the natural greenhouse gases do not have much of negative effect rather than the positive effect, which helps us to radiate the heat down to the earth crust. But these anthropogenic, these greenhouse gases are being produced, okay, by man, and emits them into the atmosphere, causes a whole lot of problem. So what happens is that it shields, okay, rather than helping to radiate this heat to the earth crust, it shields the heat completely, this radiated heat completely, from even coming to the earth crust, thereby causing a lot of problems, which we're also going to be looking at the effect on both the water body, on the environment, the climate, and the rest of them. So one of the causes of greenhouse effect is these greenhouse gases that have been emitted into the atmosphere. Number two is ozone layer depletion. Now, ozone, as we also identified earlier, is part of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The ozone plays a very big role, trapping some radioactive materials from the sun, which is dangerous to humans, to the human skin, and also reducing the intensity of the heat. That's the reason why that ozone is there. So it also plays a role in radiating heat to the earth crust. Now, what happens is that these anthropogenic greenhouse gases that have been emitted into the atmosphere example of one of those ozone layer depleting substance is the chlorofluorocarbon, which we're going to identify later in this slide. CFC, chlorofluorocarbon, and hydrogen chlorofluorocarbon, the hydrochlorofluorocarbon. These are the two major ozone layer depleting substances that have been emitted into the atmosphere. So what happens is that when this compound, chlorofluorocarbon, gets into the atmosphere, a reaction is going to take place in the atmosphere called the photodissociation reaction. So light splits the compound into different molecules. So chlorine is being separated from fluorine from carbon. And these react with the ozone in the atmosphere, which is the O3, thereby causing what we call ozone hole. It will create a hole in the ozone. So imagine now when the hole is created in the ozone, the function of the ozone will be defeated, because now the direct heat from the sun containing those radioactive materials and also the intensity of the heat falls directly to the earth crust, which is actually very, very dangerous. Okay, formation of clouds, just like I told you, this anthropogenic greenhouse gas that have been emitted into the atmosphere, it shields the heat, okay, thereby forming a thick cloud, okay, in form of fogs and smoke, because of the presence of these greenhouse gases that have been emitted into the atmosphere. And all these have greenhouse effect. It leads to the rise in temperature of the temperature in the earth crust, thereby causing global warming. So those are the causes of greenhouse effect. Just as we have there, you can see carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Okay, one of the ways this carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere is through the plants. Okay, through the animals, that's we the humans, because we inhale oxygen and then exhale carbon dioxide. So this carbon dioxide are being added into the atmosphere. They are also, from our industries, some of these greenhouse gases are also being sent into the atmosphere, just like I've already explained before. Okay, so let's proceed. I hope you're understanding what I'm trying to say. So ozone layer depletion cause for increasing greenhouse effect. I've already explained what ozone layer depletion is about. You can see the ozone hole that I'm talking about from that diagram, from that picture that you've seen. So once these ozone depleting substances get into the atmosphere and they react through photodissociation, they react to the ozone and then it causes those things that you're seeing there. Okay. So what are the causes now of ozone layer depletion? Causes of ozone layer depletion. I've already talked about some of them, but basically we have the main cause of ozone layer depletion or ozone hole from chemicals manufactured by industries. Some of them include the halocarbon refrigerants, because these halocarbons are actually produced to help in the cooling, to bring about the cooling effect in our refrigerators, these halocarbons. We also have solvents and propellants, and also foam blowing agents, which is the chlorofluorocarbon that I talked about. We also have the halogens. All these are causes of ozone layer depletion, and they are referred to as the ozone layer depleting substances. They're basically responsible for causing, the ozone hole that we talked about. So these compounds are being transported into the stratosphere, that's the atmosphere, by turbulent mixing, just as I've explained before. And once it gets into the atmosphere, photodissociation occurs, and this catalyzes the breakdown of ozone, okay, into oxygen. Okay, so those are the basic causes of ozone layer depletion. Let me take them again. I talked about 3 or 4 causes of ozone layer depletion, but basically it's manufacture of this ozone layer depletion that causes the ozone depletion. And some of those compounds include the halocarbon the halocarbon refrigerants. Before now, it was used for cooling effect in the fridge. We have the solvents, the propellants, and the foam blowing agent, which is the chlorofluorocarbons and the hydrochlorofluorocarbons, okay, that we have. Then we also have the halons. All these are the causes of ozone layer depletion. Okay, so what are the solutions now to ozone layer depletion? Solutions to ozone layer depletion. So many persons have actually proposed, okay, certain solutions to ozone layer depletion, but I'm going to explain them. Number one is to ban the manufacture of ozone layer depleting substances that we have. That's number one, to ban them. The halocarbon refrigerants, that's why most of our ACs now are refrigerators. You see an inscription on the, or a tag on the carton or on the body of the fridge or the AC. You write CFC free, meaning certain industries are beginning to understand that that there are a lot of effects, okay, of these ozone layer, these substances that they use. So there's been a ban, okay, in CFC. In fact, chlorofluorocarbon was actually banned in January 1st, 1996. That was where they banned it worldwide, that chlorofluorocarbon should no longer be used. Rather, get ozone-friendly substances, okay, for your propellants, for refrigerants, for spray foams, and the rest of them. So that's number one solution to ozone layer depletion. Number two has to do with legislations, okay? Legislations. Countries should be able to enact legislations to protect the ozone layer, because we've seen the effect of ozone layer depletion. If we start discussing now, one of the effects of ozone layer depletion is that it causes global warming, climate change, acid rainfall, flooding, and the rest of them, which in other preceding classes we'll be discussing them one after the other. So there should be legislations, okay, to contain this emission of these depleting substances. Like example, we have one of them is the Montreal Protocol, okay, which was enacted in 1987, that banned the production of the CFCs, the halons, and other ozone depleting chemicals. So in 1987, CFC was actually banned, but it came into effect in January 1st, 1996. Okay, so that's one of those. That's one of the major things that we can do to actually, help in avoiding the ozone layer depletion. There are other legislations too that have also been, put upon. For example, we have. I'm trying to look at other legislations that we have as far as the ozone layer protection is concerned. A lot of them. Okay, I can't really lay my hands on some of them now, but like I said, the solutions to ozone layer depletion is that we should be able to bring up a lot of legislations, policies that will help protect this ozone from being depleted. Okay, we have I've seen it, the Vienna Convention for the Protection of Ozone Layer. This actually was actually enacted in 1985. About 20 nations were in participation. Okay, when that particular international law was actually signed, the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer, and they expect every member country to domesticate the international law so that to start having effect in each of these countries. So those are the things, those are some of the things we can do to actually protect the ozone layer depletion. Then over time, if we can reduce the emission of these ozone depleting substances, over time there will be a natural healing that will take place, okay, to cover up that ozone hole so it can return to normalcy after a period of time. There's also artificial ozone repair that people have actually also proposed. Okay, Okay, so those are some of the solutions you can actually come up with as far as the ozone depletion is concerned. All right, so I think, okay, I still have like 5 minutes to go. Cloud formation, I've already explained this. When some of these, these ozone depleting substances are being fled into the atmosphere, it shields the atmosphere, okay, rather than these solar energies, to get to the atmosphere, it gets to the cloud and then they're being reflected back into the space. So it doesn't actually get to the earth crust, okay. So this warmed air are being trapped, okay, in the earth crust, thereby causing a whole lot of problems, as you can see from the picture that we have. So that's one of the effects of the greenhouse effect that we have. All right, let's proceed. So what are the importance of greenhouse effects now? Because I've tried to talk about it before, the importance of greenhouse effect. Just like I told you, someone has opined that life started existing because according to Charles Darwin, said life started in the water. And one of the major reasons why we have life existence on Earth is that man or animal migrated, some animal migrated from the water into the earth crust because they discovered that it was easier living in they adapted more to the earth than the water because the earth is now warmer than what they have in the water. Even some species in water bodies also experience this, like crocodile. Okay, when the sun comes out, what happens? They crawl out of water, then they stay in the dry land just to warm up their body. Okay, so you see that there's been a research or this and that the greenhouse effect actually contributed to life existence in the earth crust. Okay, because the earth crust is now warm enough to be able to, you know, to accommodate life on Earth compared to before now that we didn't have this greenhouse effect. That's number one. Number two, you can see the photosynthesis. Okay, because once this radiated heat gets to the earth crust, plants can actually, produce their own food. And if plant is not able to produce their own food, life will not exist because they are the primary producers while we are the secondary producers. If you understand the chain, okay, the feeding chain, okay. So animals depend on these plants for food, like that. So there's a cycle. So when the primary producers are being destroyed, what happens to the secondary consumers and the rest of them? Okay, so greenhouse effect have also helped in photosynthesis. Okay, so those are some of the, like I also talked about, you said another importance of greenhouse effect is that it has helped to bring radiated heat to the earth crust, thereby warming the earth crust. Many of us wouldn't have been able to survive, okay, in that kind of temperature if not for the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that have been able to send these things to the earth crust. So some of those are some of the important, like I said, existence of life. You can see we all depend basically on the primary producers, and once they're able to get this heat from the sun, they can now produce their own food, which each and every one of us actually depend on. Okay, the maintaining earth temperature is just like I've also explained, is another importance of a greenhouse effect, which I've already explained now. Then we have, so, but apart from this importance now of the greenhouse effect, do they have consequences, negative effects, greenhouse effect? So I think in my next class, because my time is up now, my next class we're going to discuss that in details. Okay, the disadvantages of accumulation of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. I've already discussed some of them earlier on when I was talking about the ozone layer depletion, the causes, and of course the effect. We're going to look at it extensively in our next class. So meaning the greenhouse effect has a positive, importance, which is the merit, and then also have its own disadvantages, the negative part of it. We looked at the positive part. We said for life existence, because you know plants depend on these heats to manufacture food, and we the animals depend on these plants. dedicate to feed. So without that, life wouldn't have been able to exist. It helps to bring temperature, to keep the temperature, the earth crust warm through this radiated heat from the sun. Okay, and then we also talked about the greenhouse effect actually started life existence on Earth through migration from the water to the land. All right, so those are some of them. So we'll come next week. We'll look at the disadvantages of accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. I want to appreciate each and every one of us that took our time to participate in this class. Thanks for attending, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.